Welcome everyone to the June 25th edition of the Employer Handbook Zoom Office Hour. It is great to see, well, I don't see any of you, see all your names, but to see what I assume are some shiny, happy faces. Things are getting better out there, but you're here because you want to talk about return to work. And we haven't resolved all the return to work issues. If so, then Carrie and I would be out of a job. So hopefully we can resolve some issues today for you in a way that doesn't involve dispensing legal advice or creating any attorney-client privilege. More on that disclaimer in a second. But before I get any further, I want to introduce my special guest today, Carrie Sherbeni from Hub International. Carrie, how you doing?
Hi, Eric. Hi, everybody. Thanks for attending. I have been following Eric's LinkedIn and blogging and pearls of wisdom for longer than I want to admit, because then you'll know how old I am, but let's just say it's been many, many, many years. And so I feel very honored that he would like me to join today, and I'm excited and I'm happy to help. I am a recovering defense attorney. I defended employers exclusively in employment law litigation for many years. I was a partner in a law firm, and some would say that I was saved and recruited to be general counsel for many years. And then I came to Hub International. We are the 4th largest insurance brokerage in the world, and I provide compliance consulting to clients both on employee benefits and employment law.
Yeah, I am fortunate to know Carrie for many years. She's been a valuable sounding board. Many times I just pick up the phone and I'll call Carrie and say, have you encountered this issue? And she'll say, well, I've counseled 5 employers on it yesterday. So she's wonderful. And you guys are in for a treat today. Let's talk a little bit about how today's going to go. Again, if you have questions, comments, whatever, just want to give a shout out. Feel free to use the chat feature. It is down there on the bottom. If you enlarge your screen, it'll say chat, you'll see it, or maybe you'll see the 3 dots that say more, and you can go into chat and get your chat window open. Also, we've got some closed captioning going today. If you don't need closed captioning, you can turn it off. You can go right down to the closed captioning feature and turn off or hide the subtitles. They are on by default, but if you'd like to turn them off, you are certainly free to do that. It shouldn't be too hard. Yes, again, we are recording this, and when it goes up on YouTube, you won't see the Zoom closed captions, but I'll set up some closed captioning so that anyone who needs it, when this gets recorded and posted to YouTube, can take advantage. All right. And oh yeah, let's get back to the disclaimer. Carrie and I are lawyers, and Carrie's a recovering defense lawyer. I am still in sipping the sauce. I am a defense lawyer, but you're not my clients. You're not Carrie's clients. And even if you are clients of Hub or Fisher Broyles, you're not for the next hour. Just pretend you're not, okay? We're not giving legal advice. We are answering questions that you may have, but we assume that all your questions are hypothetical and that you're asking them for a friend. We're not creating any attorney-client privilege. If you have real specific questions that relate to your business, don't ask us, right? This is a free Zoom. You don't want to get legal advice on a free Zoom. You'll get what you pay for. Go call up your lawyer, let him or her bill a 0.1 or a 0.2. It'll be better than trying to get anything out of us. But if you have hypothetical questions, go ahead and ask them. I see no one taking advantage of the chat feature yet, but okay, that's fine. We can roll for an hour, no problem.
Yeah, so, we can.
Carrie and I came up with a bunch of hypotheticals, or at least topics that relate to return to work. And yeah, we'll get to vaccines. We've already talked about that before. We've talked about face masks. So we'll get to that. But I think we wanted to start with the mental health component, which is something that I've been getting a lot of questions about. Carrie and I were just talking before this started that Hub has developed a training module for managers dealing with mental health issues in the workplace. And the first issue that comes up for me when it comes to mental health and return to workplace are accommodations and what employers should be doing when someone says, look, I'm not ready I know you want me to return to the workplace, but I'm not ready to return to work. Carrie, what should employers be thinking about at that point? And really, what's the playbook if that's in that situation?
So I think, the core component to all of this is transparency and communication with your employees, right? There's got to be an ongoing conversation. This is not a one and done. Get to the root cause of why the employee feels not ready to return to work. It could be something as simple as a misperception of the safety protocols, a misperception or misunderstanding of scheduling demands and lack of flexibility around return to work. Or there may be something bigger going on. The employee may have, under the umbrella of mental health, the employee may be having a medical issue. Mental health is a medical issue that's preventing them from being able to return to work. Remember, every situation is case by case. Engaging in the interactive process is incumbent upon the employer. Have a conversation, get to the root cause, better understand the factors that are at play here. It may be that you're going to ask for documentation. Fisher Broyles is a great resource to better understand the boundaries and the limits of the medical information that you're allowed to ask for to substantiate the underlying root cause that is inhibiting their ability to come back to work. Maybe it's an anxiety disorder. Maybe it's an underlying health condition that makes them more vulnerable or susceptible. I work with somebody who has a health condition that prevents him from getting the vaccine. If he gets COVID, it will likely kill him. So he's working from home for as long as he needs to work from home. That is the accommodation that we've provided to him so that he can remain safe. But you really need to get to that root cause, which is why I say this is not a one and done. It's an ongoing, transparent, non-judgmental, supportive conversation with your employees. HR is absolutely key in that conversation because many times managers really don't understand. They don't understand their obligation. They don't understand the necessity of the discussion. The world is filled with judgmental perspectives on vaccines and safety and return to work. So it's really, really important for the HR folks on the phone that you are very hands-on and stay very tightly connected to your frontline managers. Eric, what do you think?
You mentioned, Carrie, getting to the root cause, right? And you mentioned getting medical documentation, which is totally fine, right? Whether someone's applying for family medical leave because they have an anxiety issue, diagnosed anxiety issue, and they need some time off from work under the FMLA, or whether you're dealing with an ADA or state law equivalent accommodation, you're entitled, in fact, you should get medical documentation, which will help you with that interactive dialogue to figure out what accommodation or accommodations are reasonable under the circumstances. Is it continued telework? Is it coming to the office, but maybe putting this person, transferring them to a location where they feel more comfortable, whether it's not as densely populated with workers? That's one thing, okay? But in getting to the root cause, you may learn that someone doesn't have a diagnosed anxiety mental health condition, right? They're just nervous. They're just nervous. They don't qualify necessarily under the ADA because they don't have a disability. And in that situation, technically there is no duty to accommodate under the Americans with Disabilities Act, right? Now, it's not saying you can't, right? But in that situation, there is no duty to accommodate. There is no duty to provide FMLA. You could tell someone, you could almost kind of guide them or kind of give them a hint, like go to your doctor, right? Give us something, help us work with you there. And you're not precluded from working with employees in that situation, but, right, once you open, I don't want to say the flood, you give one person a break, are you opening the floodgates to a bunch of people who say, look, I don't have a mental health condition, but I just don't want to come back to work, I'm not comfortable. That's a concern, right?
Well, and it's a really delicate balancing act. It's such a good point because, on the one hand, I'm really sensitive to the challenges of recruitment and retention today. So it's more difficult today to say to clients, this is not a democracy. This is a benevolent dictatorship. And at the end of the day, if there are not legally protected reasons for the employee not to be at work, follow your work rules, be present, then you get to make decisions about flexibility, work from home, and coming into the office. You have the right to run your business. You have an obligation to accommodate employees. You have an obligation to follow FMLA. You have an obligation to do those things. But to Eric's point, when they're not at play, when they're not applicable, then your work rules and your workplace expectations apply and prevail. How do you balance that up against how difficult it is to recruit and retain talent in this market today? And that's going to be an employer by employer and maybe even department by department decision. But one of the big questions I get is right to your point, Eric, and it's, what do I do for the employee who has no protected reason to not come to work? And that really comes down to how strictly you feel you can and want to enforce your work rules. And, to Eric's other good point, you got to be consistent. We all know this. The central tenet of human resources application is be consistent in how you treat your employees, because the minute you're different with one versus the other, you set yourself up for somebody to say, well, you didn't give me the same allowance as somebody else or the same flexibility as somebody else. It must be because I am fill in the blank. And then we're talking to the EEOC.
You raise a good point, Carrie, about maintaining workplace culture with respect to return to work. So I'm kind of going out of order on our outline, and disclaimer, folks, we're two lawyers are about to opine on something that really has nothing to do specifically with employment law. And this is where we want you folks to come in, and we'd love to hear your feedback as well. But one thing we had on our outline was telework and this balance that employers need to strike between being flexible and allowing employees to telework, and recognizing that, look, over the last 15, 18 months, we've realized the efficiencies from some people teleworking. However, we had this great workplace culture when everyone was in the workplace, right? Before COVID, everything was humming along well, and people were interacting with one another. It was a great place at which to work. How do we maintain that when we're allowing now a bunch of our workforce to go hybrid? And I'd love to hear from the audience on that. But Carrie, what are you hearing from employers about that struggle, and what are you telling them?
Well, employers are increasingly interested in getting people back in the work environment. And I think part of it is because of what's being titled the Great Resignation. I don't know if anybody has been reading articles about this, but they're expecting a 35 to 40% turn in the workforce. And at least part of the root cause, sorry, I'm using that phrase a lot today, for that turn may be because of lost culture. We stay where we are in part because of money, in part because of career, but in big part because of relationships, because we like our boss, because we like our coworkers, because we have deep-seated relationships and we want to be with these people every day. Well, we haven't been with them for 15, 16, 17 months. So there's an increased sense of urgency in getting people back in the workplace, but there's an increased sense of, I want flexibility and I want to remain at home from the workforce itself. So how do you reconcile that, build your culture, bring people back, but at the same time, don't drive them out the door, because requiring them to come back may put some people in a position to say, I don't want to be back in an office. I want to remain remote. I don't like getting in the car and driving to work every day and putting on grown-up clothes. I like my pretty top with my yoga pants. Not that I do that. I mean, I would never do that. So I don't know that there's easy answers, but I think that I'm seeing a lot of creativity by employers and opening their minds to more workplace flexibility and settling for, I see a note in here that one organization is looking at 3 or 4 days a week, and giving people some flexibility to be home and opportunity to be in the office. And you might have to strike a balance. I think the only wise thing that I might be able to say here is you've got to be creative and you got to be willing to be flexible and open-minded and navigate this in a way that a year and a half, 2 years ago, your organization may never have been willing to do.
Yeah, for us, I guess we're fortunate in that pre-COVID, our law firm is unique in that we are the largest distributed, that's the fancy jargon for cloud-based, and we hate the word virtual because it sounds like we don't practice law when we're virtual, but we are the largest cloud-based firm in the world. So we've been remote forever. That's our thing. And COVID, for what it's worth, actually our ranks swell because people realized that they could work remotely and they saw this model that we had and they said, well, might as well do it there and get paid to do it, not have billable hour requirements. And this is sounding like a plug for Fisher Broyles. It wasn't meant to be. But for some people it works and for some people it doesn't. And drilling down into, I guess, a micro issue that has to do with this, but it's nonetheless on our outline. And I think it's worth discussing. And Carrie brought this up before, as we were planning the agenda for today. It's how about not just maintaining workplace culture, Carrie, but the impact of remote learning, whether it's Zoom or whatever format you use, versus training and education directly in-house, looking someone in the eye, shaking their hand, that kind of thing. How are businesses dealing with that? The remote aspect versus the in-person, and is one necessarily better than the other anymore?
So I think I'm going to be a really good lawyer and say it depends. And it really depends on what you're trying to accomplish. So I'm going to use my last 6 months as an example. Before COVID, guys, I was on the road 48 weeks out of the year. And a big part of what I did was workshops and classroom training for managers, and then internally at Hub, professional development for our service teams, building a career path, working with folks newer in their career to help develop their knowledge base and help them grow their career and grow their role with Hub. Not easy to say. So all of that came to a screeching halt, like so much of the world last March. This year, I have found internally our teams have raised their hand and asked for roundtables. And so what worked well remotely were roundtables, where it was a small group of folks, 8 to 10 people. I maxed it at 10, all on camera, all unmuted. And we roundtabled very specific issues that they brought to me. So I didn't set the agenda, they set the agenda. It was really helpful to them. They came with their questions in advance and we workshopped it in a small group setting remotely. That was great. Today, I got a phone call from one of our CSAs, one of our entry-level folks who said, I really want our lunch and learns back. I want to sit in the room, look you in the eye, look at material, ask you questions, be able to go through a formal training. I miss doing that. I miss sitting in the room and being taught and having the opportunity to develop my knowledge. I get so much more live than I do sitting remote in a roundtable setting where I'm setting the agenda, I'm delivering the material. And I thought that was really telling that there are some formats that work really well with certain specific goals, but there's nothing that, in my mind, that replaces standing in front of the room with a group of people, which I'm doing next week for 2 days, and workshopping and doing role plays and exercises. And I know you can do breakout rooms in Zoom, and I know you can do that, but I don't think you can really replace that live learning. So I think as you need to develop your talent and train and develop your folks, be very specific in your goals for the remote stuff versus the live stuff, and know that remote isn't going to function and work the same way as standing in the classroom being live with your people. I'm doing a game show in one of my sessions next week. I've got 2 role plays. We've got case studies. We're going to break people out in teams. So there's a lot more interactivity live than you can do remote, but there's still opportunity to learn remotely as well. So I don't even know if I answered your question, Eric, but that's been my experience.
I think you did. I think there is a large it depends component, but for workers with less experience, I don't want to say younger, but I mean
Newer in their
workers with
career.
less experience, right?
Yeah.
that in-person training, I can see how that is much more valuable, right? Besides, there's that collegiality that you don't get through Zoom. I mean, you just develop that culture, you develop their knowledge base, but you're also developing that culture, they're getting to know people better. That you wouldn't necessarily do when you're on Zoom. The ability to communicate with your coworkers is hamstrung there. So I see it from that perspective. For me, not that I can't still learn, but I don't personally get the same value from the in-person trainings. I mean, in my practice, I've learned that taking a deposition remotely, it's awesome. It's awesome. I don't look forward to doing in-person depositions again anytime soon. Doing mediations remotely as the mediator, I'm a private mediator, I'm a volunteer mediator with the EEOC. It's awesome. You don't have to travel. I can see people. I can communicate with people. But some people like to do it in person, and to each their own. Let's get back to some legal topics, because I see a couple questions building up in the chat. I know people are waiting for us to talk about vaccines. We'll get there. We are going to talk about vaccines, but I want to close the loop on some of the mental health and accommodation issues. We talked a little bit, Carrie, about subjective fears of returning to work, people who don't have underlying disabilities, and the need to be flexible, but also be consistent at the same time and kind of figure out what works for your company. What about the associational, not claim, but what I mean by that, folks, is I live with someone who has comorbidities, right? My spouse, my child is an at-risk individual. They have cancer, they have something bad where I need to be able to care for them, and I can't place them at risk. What is an employer's responsibility, if at all, in that situation where someone says, I need to work from home because I can't place my loved one at risk by me coming into the office?
I'm seeing a lot of those questions, and I'm also seeing questions where the employee is the person at risk, but they're vaccinated, but their child is not, and they can't put their child in daycare. So by putting the child in daycare, it puts the employee at risk. So I'm seeing these home circumstances that seem to be beyond the reach of the employer, but yet that there's risk and liability associated with dismissing it and drawing a hard line in the sand. Pick and choose your battles. My recommendation to clients is much more practically based. And practically speaking, if you've been able to run your business for the last 15 or 18 months with hybrid programs or remote programs and able to keep functioning and keep your people safe, this isn't the time, in my opinion, for whatever that, world according to Garp and Wayne's World or Carrie's World or whatever you want to call it. I don't think this is the time to pick unnecessary battles with your employees. I don't think this is the time to start drawing hard lines in the sand. I think that employers are going to have to continue to be creative and flexible with their employees, putting aside the legal obligations associated with accommodations in the workplace or avoiding associational discrimination claims. You're discriminating against me, you're allowing other people to do things, you're not letting me do things, but I've told you I've got a need because of somebody at home or my own condition. There's a lot of inconsistency happening across companies today, and I think the best advice I can give is get back to basics, because nothing's changed. We still have to be consistent. We still have to go through the interactive process. We still have to legitimize the underlying root cause, whether it's FMLA or ADA. All of the old tenets of human resources still apply. And I've noticed in the last year and a half, and I'm curious to know if you have as well, Eric, that there's been a disconnect between what we know to have always been true and applying it under these very unusual circumstances. And I find myself pretty regularly pulling people back to the basics. And once you say, no, it's the interactive process, they're like, that's right. You're right. I just didn't connect it because it's COVID and I'm freaked out.
Yes, I agree with you. But in defense of folks who are attending today in the HR community generally, and employment lawyers too, I think among other things, like the FFCRA kind of screwed us up, kind of rewired
It really
us in a
did.
way that got us off of old school classic FMLA and
Yeah.
ADA. And look, the FFCRA is what it was. It's over. I mean, you can voluntarily do it now. I see. Thank you. Shout out to Alex Rubin, who's been holding it down in the chat. Alex, great employment lawyer, who's been answering some questions about summer specific issues, especially for parents. You know, you have kids that are either home over the summer, or, you know, different childcare responsibilities. What should employers be doing? Does it matter if camp is open or closed? That kind of stuff. But yeah, I think the reason that maybe employers have been forgetting the basics is because we've had so much stuff thrown at us, and we've had to reinvent ourselves as employment lawyers and HR professionals, and become subject matter experts on things that didn't exist the week before. So sometimes we lose the forest for the trees and we forget about the basics of ADA. And I just, as folks, hope you're checking out the chat. For folks with summertime childcare issues, FFCRA is one thing, right? It's voluntary, and most employers, I think, anecdotally really aren't providing it anymore now that most people are vaccinated. But don't forget about state law. So, for example, in New Jersey still has some of the newer legislation that is passed during COVID time about leave from work for certain situations related to COVID. That's still in place. So in whatever state or states you operate, if you're a multi-state employer, don't sleep on state and local laws, and make sure that even though you may not have an obligation under federal law to provide leave or some sort of an accommodation, whether paid or unpaid, you may have a duty under state law or local law to do that. So just make sure you're staying in tune with what's going on at the state and local level. Carrie, it's 12:30. I'm going to reset. Remind everyone that they are enjoying, hopefully, the Employer Handbook Zoom Office Hour, the June 25th edition. Welcome, and thank you for being here. We are recording this. If you're watching this on YouTube, hey, how you doing? Look down there where it says subscribe, and hit the bell icon and click like and comment and all that good stuff. You know, the YouTube algorithm likes that, and I'm not getting paid for this, but I would like more people to see these videos, and I think a like helps. So it doesn't cost you anything. Go ahead and do it. Let's talk about vaccines.
Everyone's been waiting.
Vaccines. Well, you know, I blogged about it, and a lot of people have blogged about that Texas decision from what now is it 2 weeks ago, where several nurses and employees of a Texas healthcare system sued, seeking an injunction which would stop its employer from enforcing a rule that required everyone to get vaccinated unless you had a religious, you need a religious accommodation, a pregnancy accommodation, or a disability accommodation. Otherwise, everyone else had to get vaccinated, or you would lose your job. You had until June something to get vaccinated. The plaintiffs sued in Texas in federal court, sought an injunction. The theories were basically this is against public policy. This would amount to wrongful discharge. This would violate the emergency use authorization. This would violate the Nuremberg Code in Germany. I mean, all sorts of kind of theories ranging from, okay, I can understand kind of where you're coming from, to like, get the hell out of here. That's just really, you know, offensive. And the court just said, no, sorry, employer can enforce a mandatory vaccine policy, period, subject to the duty to accommodate for religion, disability, and pregnancy. So Where does that leave us, though? We have workplaces where most workplaces, employers aren't mandating vaccinations. They're using the honor system. They're saying, hey, if you're vaccinated, all right, you don't have to wear a mask. If you're unvaccinated, you need to wear a mask. But we're not gonna check vaccine cards. We trust you. But if we see someone who is anti-vax, who is unvaccinated, going on social media and talking about how they've never been vaccinated and they're proud not to be vaccinated, and then they show up to work the next day without a mask, there's going to be trouble, right? There's going to be trouble. Don't out yourself. But generally, it's on our system. That said, right, the waters aren't necessarily calm in the workplace. I've been hearing more and more, I don't know about you, Carrie, about kind of this vaxxed versus unvaxxed, I don't want to say class system in the workplace, but this rift, right? Like hostile work environment type things kind of churning up between vaxxed and unvaxxed. You can imagine the things that could be said which would create a hostile work environment based on a protected class. Being vaxxed, not a protected class, but national origin, for example, being a protected class. Vaxxed people not wanting to work with unvaxxed people, notwithstanding CDC guidance that says you're not at risk. Right? Which of these from like column A, column B, or maybe something else are you seeing or hearing?
I'm seeing all of the above and then some.
Okay.
So to start with the vaccine approach, I agree with you. Most of my clients are not mandating vaccines. I have seen some creativity though. I don't know where I land on the creativity because some of it still makes me very nervous. But I have one client doing something very interesting. And they said, you know what, we don't want to get into the vaccine conversation. We want people to be able to take responsibility for their own sense of well-being and safety in the workplace. So people can pick from color-coded bracelets. Green means you don't have to wear a mask. You can come up to me. You can be near me. You can shake my hand. You can hug me. No social distancing, no COVID protocols. Yellow means please stay 6 feet away. Keep your mask on. Don't come near me. Don't shake my hand. Please follow COVID safety protocols when you're around me. And I think that's an interesting approach. What they're trying to do, they're a tech company and they want to bring their coders back into the office because as I understand it, especially in the tech world, that live collaboration is incredibly important as they're trying to build out code and software systems and they run into hiccups and issues. So I thought that was interesting.
Can I ask you about the question about the green and yellow bracelets? Because we talked in the past on one of these Zooms about doing a bracelet system as a kind of a checks and balances for someone who is vaccinated. You give them a bracelet to wear, basically, instead of having them put their vax card around their neck. And a couple of us lawyers concluded, again, just lawyers, just hypothetical here, saying that could create an issue because the EEOC has said, while you can check vaccine status, someone's vaccine status is then confidential, right? So basically, you're telling someone to put that on full display, which I think could create a problem, right? But in your situation, you're saying that someone who's vaxxed or unvaxxed could pick whatever bracelet color they want. Is that basically it?
Correct. I mean, you can ostensibly connect those dots, right? But no one is asking the employees to reveal their health status, their vaccine status. What they're saying to employees is you determine your comfort level. I've got a coworker I went to dinner with a couple of weeks ago, and she picked me up at my hotel, and I got in the car and she's wearing her mask. And I said, did you get vaccinated? Because we're very good friends and this is a personal conversation. And she says, yes, but I'm still being very cautious. And I said, totally respect that. I get it. So this is much more about their sense of their comfort level with observing or not observing COVID health and safety protocols. I do have a client, however, to your point, Eric, that called me up one day and said, we have a great idea. I don't know, what's a great idea? And they said, we're gonna have everyone wear stickers. And the sticker is gonna identify whether or not they're vaccinated. I'm like, this isn't like voting. You can't force somebody to reveal their medical status. And while employers, and this is really important, and I'm sure you've already covered it, but I'm going to cover it again. While the EEOC has paved the way for employers to be able to ask about vaccine status is still a health condition. It is a health status. And what I say to clients is, you wouldn't ask somebody to wear a sticker revealing their high blood pressure, their diabetes, their cancer, their thyroid function. So you can't ask them to wear a sticker revealing their vaccine status. So I thought that what my client did with these bracelets was interesting. It's creative. I'm still not sure I love it, because I still think that employees could have a target on their back. Well, what's wrong with you? Aren't you vaccinated? Why are you wearing a yellow bracelet? But I don't know that in the workplace there's any way to avoid some of those conversations. And rather than not implementing protocols or programs like honor systems for masks, shouldn't we instead, I guess, be having conversations around enhancing and increasing diversity and inclusion training, unconscious bias, sensitivity training in the workplace? I know people hate that phrase, but can we beef up and amp up the training that we have around the kinds of conversations, the way we speak to each other, passing judgment on each other? Can we address that instead of trying to take the position that we're just going to be able to stop this from happening? I don't know that there's any protocol that isn't going to create an opportunity for problematic confrontational conversations in the workplace.
I think that's exactly right. I mean, I've seen personally a noticeable uptick in respect in the workplace trainings that I've been conducting. I've been conducting them via Zoom. I haven't been going into the workplace, but I think that's more of a function of not a safety thing, but the fact that people are still working remotely and getting everyone together is more logistically difficult than just doing it on Zoom. But these respect to the workplace conversations, they cover a variety of topics, from the typical traditional sexual harassment, race discrimination, retaliation, all that kind of stuff that you would typically have done before COVID. More emphasis now than in the past on, especially for managers, FMLA and ADA, and dealing with accommodations and how to spot them, how to spot those requests, especially when people don't use the letters FMLA and employees don't use formal speak, like I have an actual disability, which substantially limits one or more major life activities. Mine is breathing and working. I need a reasonable accommodation. Can you provide one? Like, no one says that. But getting employers and managers to at least spot that so that they can get that to the proper people to facilitate. And then dealing with kind of the issues that we just discussed, DEI, whether it's, spawned from COVID or just DEI generally, and unconscious bias, things like that. I mean, these are important discussions that we need to be having, and we can't forget about. It can't just be about whether someone has a vaccine or not, or whether someone's position on COVID. I mean, we have to bring it back and not forget where we came from, some of these important issues as well.
And Eric, I'll tell you, I was caught off guard and surprised when I first got back out on the road. So a quick story, I get back out on the road and I go to a meeting with a prospect. We got people from my company, people from the prospect's company, and somebody at the table starts doing around the world or around the table on everyone's vaccine status and who got COVID and how sick did they get and how did they react to the vaccine. And I realized that we have to have conversations around COVID etiquette, because these discussions around whether or not we're vaccinated, how we reacted to the vaccine, whether or not we had COVID, what were our symptoms, how sick were we? These are conversations that, I go to dinner with my neighbors. I'm in Florida. We've been going to dinner for 8 months now, 10 months. We've been open. But you go to dinner with people and this is typical dinner conversation. It's typical social gathering conversation. So I think as we talk about training, as we talk about creating heightened awareness of how we communicate with one another, things that are appropriate to say and inappropriate to say, I think there's a whole new conversation around COVID etiquette. And in fact, we're building something like that here. What are the boundaries? What's appropriate? What's not appropriate? What kind of conversations should you or shouldn't you be having? And certainly don't put each other on the spot sitting in a public forum about what your vaccine status is and how you reacted to it. And I didn't even see it coming. But it was an interesting awareness creator that I can come and share with you guys as you bring people back into the workplace. Your employees and your managers will be having these discussions with one another, and it's something that you're going to have to get ahead of.
I'm curious for folks that are watching along, if you wouldn't mind, that you can put it publicly in the chat, or you can direct message Carrie or me and not do it publicly. But I'm curious, how many of you folks in your businesses have conducted or participated in this COVID etiquette type, what you call it, training, or at least given some communication on COVID etiquette, whether it's asking coworkers about their vaccine status, proselytizing about, getting vaxxed or not getting vaxxed. These types of COVID related conversations, they can get touchy, to say the least. Have you done it? And if not, is it something that you're considering? So that's a couple of people so far saying they have. Good. And then some people saying they recognize the need for it too. That's good. One issue, I suppose, Carrie, with respect to vaccines that we should be talking about, and this piggybacks off of that Texas decision I mentioned before, where the federal court said this idea of an emergency use authorization vaccine, how does that factor into a mandatory vax policy? And it doesn't, because that emergency use authorization and using, the plaintiffs allege that they were being treated as guinea pigs in a test by their employer to get vaccinated. And the federal court said, no. Emergency use authorization requirements don't apply to private employers. That's something completely different that you've misunderstood. You can't bring that into the workplace. It doesn't apply. But at some point, presumably, vaccines are going to get beyond EUA status, and they're going to be approved like any other vaccine, like the flu vaccine, for example. Let's look into our crystal ball. Let's assume at some point, maybe by the fall, I'm guessing, that one of the vaccines, one or more of the vaccines, becomes kind of standard approved, just like, I'm using the wrong jargon, but basically gets beyond EUA status to flu shot status, normal, whatever. Do you think more employers are going to mandate vaccinations at that point? It'd be more palatable, or will employers treat it like the flu shot and say, look, you want to get the flu shot? Get the flu shot. If you don't want to get the flu shot, don't get the flu shot. We've never been that gung-ho about it in the past. We've had vaccination clinics where if you want to sign up and get vaccinated, by all means do it, but to each their own. Which way do you see it going, Carrie? Mandate, or, we'll make it available, but do what you want?
I think the latter. And I think the latter for a few reasons. One is, I think employers, again, back to recruitment and retention, you're creating another obstacle for recruiting and retaining talent if you mandate the vaccine. But I will tell you that Hub has a lot of resources that exist to support the insurance programs that we place. Shameless plug, I admit it. And one of them is an entire health and performance or wellness division. And we've got experts across the country, and they are already receiving, and have been for some time, questions about how to build out wellness programs, wellness fairs, wellness incentives that include the COVID vaccine. These are companies that already have wellness programs that include incentives for flu vaccine, or companies that are now newly interested in adding a vaccination program or component to a wellness program for their employees and for their organization. So just the uptick in outreach to the wellness folks about how do we build out our wellness program going forward to address and include COVID vaccines tells me that we are going to continue to see this amp up and ramp up. We're seeing more vaccine clinics. I have a client in Miami that's a museum, and they held a 3-day vaccine clinic for the community. They brought in all 3 forms of vaccines so people could choose, and they made it available to all of their employees at the same time. So we're seeing employers develop programs to create increased access points. I don't see a movement toward mandatory yet, although if you look at the headlines today, I think Morgan Stanley did something really interesting. I don't know if you saw this yet, Eric, but they have a mandatory vaccine program. Nobody can go back in the office unless they're vaccinated, but they're not firing anybody. If you don't get vaccinated, you've been working remotely for the last year and a half, just keep working remotely. And I think that's a pretty well-designed middle ground, right? You want a mandatory program, you've got it to be in the office, but for everyone else, no one's getting fired, no one's losing their jobs. They've been performing just fine remotely. They'll continue to perform remotely. And I think if you want to have a mandatory vaccine program, that's kind of the best of both worlds.
Yeah, the gentleman from Shark Tank, Kevin, I forget his last name, Mr. Wonderful.
Oh, Mr. Wonderful, yeah.
Yes, that's what he's doing in his company. It's a mandatory vaccine policy if you want to come to work, to the office. If you don't want to come to the office and want to work remotely, whether you're vaccinated or not, knock yourself out. And that's what you'll do. But until you get vaccinated, you are not stepping into the workplace. I mean, subject to accommodations, right? Religious, disability, and pregnancy. So,
and I think that strikes such a nice balance. It's the first time since the CDC modified the mask guidance that I said, oh my gosh, finally a balance. Like throughout the last year and a half, it's been what's practical, what's implementable, is that a word? What's doable. And I think that really, so that addresses employees who want to continue to work from home. You're not disciplining or firing or not hiring people because they want to remain flexible and work from home. It addresses workplace safety for people who want to be there, including your customers. It ensures continuity of staffing. I just think that is a really nice, delicate balance between safety, talent, management, recruitment, and productivity.
Yeah. And it's not going to work for every workplace. I mean, I see some of the comments in the comment section saying, look, different strokes for different folks. Of course. I mean, if you are an industrial plant or, you make widgets, right? I can't make the widgets remotely, right? I got to be on the widget line, making the widgets. That's not having if you're not vaccinated, you can work remotely. It doesn't work for every business. And I see some people, someone commented to me, isn't that rewarding employees who decide not to be vaccinated in some ways? And I don't know. I mean, I think we're at the point right now where people have made their decisions. I think there are very few people who are on the fence about getting vaccinated. And maybe that'll change once we get out of EUA status. Maybe more people will get vaccinated. That could be a milestone. But it strikes me that right now, the only people who aren't vaccinated, who probably want to get vaccinated are, well, kids. Maybe the kids don't want to get the shot, but their parents want them to. But I think pretty much everyone's made the call for themselves, whether to get vaccinated or not. Carrie, we got about 10 minutes left. Do you want to take a few questions, and I'll encourage people to add their questions to the chat window?
Yeah, that would be great. And I want to respond to Dana and Brian. I'm watching this most recent.
Go ahead.
It's very cool. So Dana, you bring up a good point, but I'll tell you that I've got some coworkers. I've got a coworker that had her second child and we went remote. So she had a 2-year-old and a 3-month-old, and she was working remote. She couldn't wait to get back in the office. I know some other folks whose spouses likewise went home. So all the kids, the spouses, everyone's home, everyone's around the house. So for some people, going back to the office is a welcome vacation compared to the dogs, the cats, the kids, the spouses, and the lawn guy every other week. So I think it is a case by case for sure.
Ready for a couple other questions?
Yeah.
Okay. So there was one asked to me early on. This was private. I won't say who it was. Is there anything a teacher can do? Again, this is hypothetical, I assume. Is there anything a teacher can do who refuses to get the vaccine and who is facing termination because of that decision? This is a younger woman who is concerned about getting pregnant in the future and the impact that getting vaccinated could have on her ability to have children. Right now, to this person's knowledge, and I'm not a doctor either, there have been no studies or no published studies that really go one way or another that say it's absolutely safe or it's absolutely not safe if you want to get pregnant down the line to get vaccinated. So we have someone who isn't pregnant yet, but is concerned about future pregnancies. Is there anything that person can do, or let's flip it, since we have mostly an HR audience, what should the employer do in that situation when faced with that concern from an employee?
In my mind, Eric, that's a business decision, because you're now outside of the realm of ADA and religion. And so now you have a business decision to make. I'll tell you a quick funny story. I'm all about the stories. I had a minor surgery earlier in the year, and I'm literally laying in the operating room, and the anesthesiologist is standing over me with the mask, and the nurse is telling me this exact story about herself. And she said, my hospital's not mandating it, but I'm getting a lot of pressure from my coworkers, but I want to have children and I'm uncomfortable getting vaccinated. At the end of the day, it is a business decision regarding how strictly you want to enforce this mandate program, and your balancing act between the necessity of having a vaccinated workforce, like in a school setting, I can see that that's important, versus the necessity of retaining and keeping your talent. From the employee's perspective, I can understand the dilemma, but these are also personal life choices, just like these are business decisions to be made by the organization.
I think for the employee, right? If they run into resistance from the employer, and look, find another job. I mean, it's at will employment. You're not stuck there. It would stink to have to leave, but it's a workplace that isn't sensitive to your medical concerns, whether they are accurate or not. And I don't think they're irrational in this state. I think it's right that, what I've heard, that we don't know the effects are on the ability to have children in the future. So if you're that uncomfortable, and I don't mean that pejoratively, see if you can find other work.
Yeah.
As the employer, I agree with you, Carrie. It's a business decision. I think in that situation, I mean, as long as I don't have 100 people knocking down my door with the same issue, which I assume I'm not going to in most situations, it's probably going to be a few one-offs, I lean towards accommodating, because I would be concerned from a business standpoint what it would look like if I ended up above the fold in the newspaper with this issue because I fired someone because of concerns over fertility and getting pregnant, and it wouldn't be a good look. So,
and I've literally said to clients, is this really the hill that you want to die on?
right.
You can always be more generous than the ADA requires and Title VII requires, but be consistent in your generosity. Don't start hand picking and cherry picking who you're going to make allowances for and who you're not going to make allowances for, because then you start to create risk and exposure. And I think that goes to a little bit to Andrea's question about men versus women returning to the workplace.
Yeah. So a couple other questions. Roy asks, would requiring unvaccinated employees to be masked cause a problem? Not a legal problem. You can require everyone to wear a mask if you want, but if you want to require specifically unvaccinated people to wear a mask, and you say that vaccinated folks have the choice, you can absolutely do that. Not a problem. Not a problem. Legally, whether it creates any sort of friction in the workplace, masked versus unmasked, do you have employee relations issues? That I don't know. Well, you just have to see. But as a matter of law, not a problem. Here's a question. I'm sorry. I wanted to answer Adriana's question and I missed the first part of it. I only caught the second part, so I may come back. Here's a question from Andrea. Is anyone concerned that men will return to the office more than women and then get more advantages, thus later claims of discrimination? Does anyone think you should only allow men to return in the same proportion as women, or is this crazy? What do you think, Carrie?
I don't think it's crazy. I think that there's going to be a lot of unintended consequences and potential for disparate impact claims. I don't know that you will be able to regulate the proportion of men versus women coming back into the workplace. I think you're going to have legitimate business needs to get people back regardless, and you're just going to have to be sure that you're in a defendable position to have legitimate business needs to get people back. So I don't know that practically speaking, you're going to be able to manage quotas. I don't know that that's a good way to go from running your business and bringing people back to work, but I also don't think it's crazy to keep your eye on that ball and pay attention. What do you think, Eric?
I think you raise a good point with disparate impact. So for folks who may not be familiar with disparate impact, that is a policy that is neutral on its face that ultimately ends up harming or adversely impacting, having disparate impact on one protected class versus another. So the classic example is criminal background checks, credit checks, having an adverse impact potentially on African Americans and the Hispanic community. So having a policy about return to work that could have a disparate impact on women, I could see it having a disparate impact on older employees too. You need to be careful about policies that are well-intended, but end up harming one protected class versus another. You may want to tinker with those policies so that you're not alienating one section of your workforce. We are nearing the top of the hour. We've got a minute left. So I'm not going to take any more questions at this point. I want to be mindful of everyone's time. I want to thank everyone for showing out today and for the opportunity to be of service to you. Always a pleasure. Always great to have you here. We love getting your feedback. Thanks for the chats. If you want to see particular topics discussed in the future, you can always email me. You can contact me. Before you guys leave, I've been bad about this. Let me put all of our contact information so you can connect with Carrie and me on LinkedIn and all that good stuff. Carrie, thank you so much. Anything you want to plug before you go, or anything you want to say before you leave?
Very quickly, guys, this is a really good time to button up your employment practices liability insurance policy. I've been saying that throughout COVID. The market's hardening. We're seeing a lot more litigation, a lot more than we saw last year. So be sure that Eric and Fisher Broyles is your panel counsel, and double check those policies and make sure you've got the right coverages for your business.
Yes. The special counsel rider that you can select your own counsel, always helpful. Always helpful. Thank you so much, Carrie. Thank you everyone for showing out today. Again, this is being recorded. It's going to be up on YouTube. I'll have it posted either later today or over the weekend. Link certainly in the blog on Monday. But if you're not subscribed to the YouTube channel, I just posted a link. Get up on it, subscribe, and I think I posted a link, or maybe I didn't. Whatever, you'll find it. Just Google Employer Handbook YouTube channel, subscribe. You'll get this video as soon as it comes out. Thank you, everyone. Stay safe. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you in the next office hour. Bye, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.